This story is written by Peter Johnson, great-grandson of the Rileys. Peter was born in 1940 in a pub in Withersea, East Yorkshire. His grandmother, Kathleen Riley, was one of 14 children born to his great-grandfather, Richard Riley, who married Richard Stiggins. He served in the Navy in World War I, after which he became a Coast Guard and was posted to Yorkshire. Peter moved to 1 Sydenham Road in Deal in 1954, just after the death of his grandparents. His great-uncles, Bill and George Riley, lived further along the road. His first memories of moving to Deal were of the dereliction of buildings along Middle Street, especially those near the Prince Albert pub. This area had many bombed houses with their roofs missing. The Riley family date back many years to the era when Deal had a thriving fishing community. Early records go back to 1863, when Richard Riley married Sarah Redsall. Bill and George were two of their children. The Rileys' boats, the Sunbeam and Gipsy King, were stationed opposite the Forester pub at North Deal. Richard Riley, his brother William and the two sons, Bill and George, were crewmen on the North Deal lifeboat and were involved in many heroic rescues, which included the vessels Tugu and Piave, for which they were awarded medals. There was a hut stationed on their beach plot. This was an old railway carriage, which has featured in many old photos of North Deal. It's recorded that the carriage came from the wreck of the Africa, which foundered near the Coast Guard station. She carried a cargo of railway carriages. Bill and George Riley's main income was from taking out fishing parties and trawling in Sandwich Bay. Fish caught was sold to Smith's, the fish merchant in Peter Street. Peter often helped out as beach hand in the early years, but on occasions he had the opportunity to go afloat as a second hand. One regular angler was Marjorie Sitwell, who at this time lived in Farrier Street. She often invited Peter to go fishing with her and Bill Riley. On one occasion he caught a 14-pound turbot. This of course belonged to Marjorie, but he did get an NFSA medal for the specimen fish. As autumn arrived, herring nets were taken out of storage and made ready for the coming season. Fish caught went to the fish merchants. Jim Scarden bought many of the catches of herrings. These were carted off to Brewer Street. However, some of the herrings were hung in rafters of one of the old derelict buildings near the Prince Albert and smoked into bloaters, then sold to the merchants. On one interesting occasion, Peter's great-uncle Bill Riley staggered out to the Foresters' pub and said, "Let's go and get some herrings." Peter knew he was 3 sheets to the wind, but went up the beach with him. They loaded 6 herring nets into a rowing boat and went to sea. The nets were shot just outside the Deal Pier head. After about half an hour, Bill decided to haul the nets. Pete was amazed at the huge number of fish in the nets and became very worried as the boat got lower and lower in the water as the catch came aboard. The sea, however, was very calm and they safely rowed ashore. It was estimated there was over 5,000 herrings in the catch. Many were sold on the beach at 5 or 6 for a shilling, and the rest went to the fish merchants. George Riley had a very powerful marine radio supplied to him by Hammonds in Dover. He was paid as a listener. Often late at night, Peter and his friends would go along to George Riley's house and listen to the 4 lightships calling in with their daily reports. On the night of the 27th of November 1954, a storm force gale was blowing from the southwest. The South Goodwin lightship reported that she was off station. George realised she was drifting. Not long after this, the Maroons went up, calling out the lifeboat. What happened is another story which would take too long to talk about. The horizon was very different in those days, with many masts of several World War II wrecks being visible on the Goodwin Sands, and the wreck of the James Harrod, which was still lying off Deal Castle. In July 1955, a distress call went out from a vessel called the Signet. She had been holed after a collision with another vessel and was in danger of sinking. George Riley was put in charge of the situation and he escorted the Signet into shallow water, where she was beached just south of Sandown Castle. Bill and George were given the contract to ferry workers out to the Signet. These had the task of unloading the cargo of grain. Many of these workers are off-duty Marines, and Peter remembers the look of horror in their faces when large waves were breaking on the beach. Bill and George knew what they were doing, and launches were always safe. Peter and his cousin Ginger Riley earned pocket money by ferrying some of the workers to and fro, charging them £0.5 each, The Signet was eventually refloated. Some years later, when the Deal Sea Wall was built, the old railway carriage was broken up, fishing nets were disposed of, and the Sunbeam and Gipsy King moved to a small plot south of the Royal Hotel. Peter and Ginger Riley continued taking out fishing parties until George Riley died. He owned the boats and in his will asked for them to be sold. The Sunbeam was bought by somebody in Dover but sank while being towed there. The Gipsy King was renamed the Gipsy Queen and was relocated on Walmer Beach. 3 of the Rileys' North Deal lifeboat certificates are held in Walmer Lifeboat Station, and Peter has some of the medals. This was the end of an era for a proud Deal family of fisherfolk and a small part of what they did in their lives.